Albedo yawned, asking why they had to be there 3 hours early, and Ben tells him that Rook is excited to see his sister and doesn't want to miss her stop, because it's only going to be brief. And they'd complained that it was still too early to be there. But eventually, the Starliner that she was going to be on finally did land, and Rook was excited to see his sister as they had gone over waiting for the other people to unload. Seeing Char, Rook says that he wishes to be the first one to welcome her to Earth, but then sees the young one and asked why he is there, with Char saying that he had stowed away on the liner, and Ben sighs, saying that he'd radio to let them know what's going on so that Da and Brala don't freak out about Young One being gone. After doing so, Ben says that they could get some smoothies on him as they all headed on out, and Young One seemed to have developed a friendship with Albedo and sort of a rivalry as they were trying to see who could finish the fastest, with Rook telling them that they should slow down but it was too late. They'd both gotten brain freeze from the smoothies, and Ben just shook his head, sighing. They take notice of a Ravanigander walking over with a staff in hand, looking angry, and Ben asked who this guy is. Rook tells them that his name is Kundo and he is the master of Ravana Kai, their traditional fighting style. Char says that the master does not approve of her leaving to join the plumbers as Rook has. Kundo says that he is ashamed to greet Rook Blanco and was there to return his sister to their home, with the young one running over to Char and Kundo asking if the shame of his family knows no end, but was cracked in the jaw by Ben, who then began to crack his knuckles, telling him to shut it. If he's so great, then why didn't he help with the Muroids or the incursions for that matter? The master of Ravana Kai then prepares for a fight. However, Rook warns them that fighting would be a bad decision on their part. Kundo mistakenly thought that he was talking to Ben and says that they should listen to Blanco, but Ben cracks his knuckles as the two then start to fight. While their fighting style was impressive, he couldn't counter Ben, who could readily switch between multiple fighting styles at once. Ben had begun to move around Kundo with his arms up, weaving around his attacks before throwing punches of his own, striking them in the face a few times. Though when he'd started to expect this, he'd switched to throwing a kick to the gut, knocking Kundo back a bit as he'd coughed in pain, looking surprised by this fighter as he'd never encountered someone that could detect his attacks so readily and fight seemingly in different patterns to throw them off. Using the staff to stand, they'd gotten angry, asking what sort of trickery this was, and Rook says that he tried to warn them. Ben has learned and mastered several fighting styles over the years, and not just focused on a singular one, making him a well-balanced and dangerous fighter that could switch to various tactics at the drop of a hat. Kundo then realized that Rook was warning him, not warning Ben, and got even angrier at what was going on. Focusing, Kundo prepared to attack, and Rook called out to Ben that was the stone cutter. He needed to avoid it at all costs. With a nod, he then watched Kundo carefully, as he'd slammed his fist onto the ground and energies had been sent out, damaging the street, with Ben jumping forwards at the last second and kicking them in the face with the soles of both feet, knocking them back further and rolling over back towards the others. Rook says that they should leave immediately to get their siblings to safety, and Ben nods in agreement, as they'd taken off before Kundo could recover to go after them. This means his proto-tool was never broken, and that they didn't have to try to find a way to fix it, cutting that from the episode. Young One still wanted to find a way to get his Bienthog off, as he was 2 years older than Rook was when he lost his. Albedo volunteered to help with that, somehow also getting Bluekij and Driba joined in as well, with Char saying that they should be going after Kundo, as he was a threat to the people out there. Ben actually agrees with that, but says that she's still a cadet and should stay put for now. Albedo says sucks to be them, but Rook says that he and Young One would also be staying put at the base as well, making them complain about being left behind while they get to have all the fun, but Ben tells him this isn't a game. Kundo is seriously out to hurt them, and they are better off there than they are out in the open. Ben activates communications on his watch and calls for Ship to come keep watch to make sure they don't try anything. And once the galvanic mechamorph was there, they'd headed on off back to face Kundo. We cut to the two of them in Undertown asking around for anyone that had seen Kundo, and soon were attacked by him with them telling Rook that his time on Earth has made him weak. Ben tells him that it has made Rook a better fighter, and let the two of them duke it out with Rook using a tactic much like Ben had earlier, only he was using different fighting styles than Ben had, since Kundo would have been expecting those probably. The street fighting had proved exceptionally useful against them, as it was a more wild branch of fighting with a lot of different variation of technique. They were getting angry that he was being proven wrong about what he'd believed about going off-world, making them weak and lazy, as he was getting his ass kicked by his former student, just as his friend had earlier, and tried to use the stone cutter on him directly, with Rook using the proto tool in its shield configuration to block the attack, causing the Ravanakai master to be knocked back, sliding a bit onto the ground. Ben calls out to Rook, holding his hands together down low, offering a boost, and Rook took off running, stepping onto Ben's hands as he'd thrown him upwards into the air while Rook jumped at the same time, giving him an extra boost in how high up he could actually make it, as they were headed straight for Kundo and held his arm out, slamming it into his former teacher as he'd landed a flying elbow drop. This made them cough out blood and hold their gut and ribs in pain, as they slowly tried to get back up, coughing a few more times, as Rook then lifted up Kundo by his shirt and threw them into the side of a brick wall area. They just laid there this time, in too much pain, and coughed, telling Rook that he was wrong. His time on Earth didn't make him a weaker fighter, but a brutal one, as he was slipping in and out of consciousness. Rook then says that he's not a brutal fighter, but a skilled one, as a brutal fighter wouldn't know when to stop, while putting cuffs onto Kundo, placing him under arrest for attempting to kidnap his sibling, and began to read him his rights while helping him up onto a sitting position onto some steps that were nearby. He told them that Ben can be ruthless and brutal when he needs to be, but he simply wishes to protect his friends and family, along with the other innocent people he has met over his travels, and he hopes Kundo will learn to get over his hatred of the outside world, as there were many wondrous and beautiful places to see and wonderful people to meet as well. The last thing was Young One's Bienthog falling off, finally, and Rook asks what name he chooses, performing the ceremony there on Earth, and they tell him that he wishes to be known as Rook Ben. Our Ben tells him that he'll take them back to Ravana while Rook takes Char to the academy so that she isn't late.